Hey everyone! So there are some ways to store information in Ruby. We can store our information as variables, arrays, or hashes. In this video, we want to focus on variables. Variables can store one piece of information. So before we continue, let's make a new file. I'm going to make a new file and I'm going to save it as variables.rb. Variables.rb. Save that. The value of variables can either be hard-coded in, such as what we did here, or it can be obtained from user input. We'll take a closer look at user input in a few minutes. And let's go through the reason why we use variables. First reason, using variables makes your code easier to understand. Imagine if you don't have variables. You would have random numbers here. So you'll have if 100 is less than 160, do this. If 100 is greater than 200, do this. It makes it hard for us to understand what these numbers are or why we're even comparing these numbers. Using meaningful variable names helps you understand what these numbers are, and it makes it easier for you to understand the logic that's going on here. So if your height is less than the minimum, you don't want to ride the roller coaster. If your height is greater than the maximum, you don't want to ride the roller coaster. If your height is between the minimum and the maximum, you should probably get on that ride. So that's easy for us to understand. Second, it also prevents errors. For example, if we're trying to check for a different height, let's say someone else whose height is 150 comes in, and you want to check 150 here, 150 here, 150 here, you'll have to change the value 3 times, and that's likely to cause an error compared to if you're changing only once here, which is why we summarize our values into one variable. Another reason, we want to reuse informations. For example, minimum is 160. We want to use minimum here, minimum here. The number of times we use minimum might increase as the code increases, and it's easier for us to only use it as a variable. Also, it helps us understand the logic as it goes further. And we want to manipulate values of a variable. That's what usually happens in a code, and it's hard to do that when the variables don't exist. So we want to just make that a variable, and then we'll change its values later on. When we're naming our variables, we try our best to avoid the special characters, except for underscores. Underscores are another way of representing spaces because space is something to avoid when you're writing a variable name. So we want to avoid special characters because they usually indicate methods or usage of a variable, so we want to avoid that. Another thing to avoid is using reserved words. For example, if, else if, while, and these are reserved words. We're not supposed to use this for our variable names, so we use some other more common words such as minimum, maximum. This isn't a reserved word, so you can use it. Now, let's go back to our file, the file we made, and we're going to go through an example. Let's try to make a code that will find the difference between the maximum height and the minimum height. Let's set our minimum height to 160, and for our maximum height, we're going to get this value from a user input. So gets.trump, this indicates user input. We're going to go through this more in later videos, but for now, let's just say that gets.trump means we're getting a user input, and the value would be stored inside our maximum value. So let's make a new variable. We're manipulating the value of maximum and minimum inside of variable difference. So let's set maximum minus minimum. Something to note is that our variables most of the time stores our values as characters, strings. They're not usually numerical, and we can't do arithmetic operations with non-numerical values. So what we do is we use the method called toInteger, to to convert our variables into integers. This is what I was talking about. Using a dot point indicates that we're using a method. So if we're using a variable name with a dot point in between, Ruby is going to think that you're trying to use let's say if I put a dot point here, Ruby will think that we're trying to use a method called imum after a variable called max, and it's just confusing. It's likely to cause an error. So it's better for us to just stick to no special characters other than underscore. So now that we have a difference, we want to print the result. So we want to put the difference is you use a hashtag, a curly bracket, and put the variable name in to print our output. Also, I'm going to add a print statement here, so to prompt our user to enter in an input so that they know when they have to enter the input. So we'll say enter the maximum height, and we'll save this value. We'll save this file, go to our terminal, and run it. So we're prompted to enter a maximum height. I'm going to enter 200. So the difference is 40. 200 and 160, we get a difference of 40. So that looks right so far. So now we're going to reuse our difference value. So let's imagine we have to make another variable called half, which is half of the difference. We'll go difference dot 2 underscore f divided by 2. 2 underscore f is a convert to float method, which is what we usually need when we're doing divisions, because when we're doing division, we don't always get integers. Most of the time, we're going to get float numbers. A lot of the time, we're going to get float numbers, which is why we want to convert this to float so that we can do our arithmetic operation and get a decimal for our output. So let's do puts half of the difference is, let's print half. Let's save this. Let's go back to our terminal. Let's run our file again. We're prompted to enter a maximum height. For this time I'm going to enter an odd number so that we get an odd difference. Therefore, we get a decimal point as our half of the difference. I hope this makes sense. I hope you understand why we have to use variables. Thank you so much for listening. I'll see you in the next video.